Hi, my name is Trevor. Okay, so during this lab, what we're going to be doing is installing 3 boxes. So we're going to be installing an octagon box, and we're going to use that as our simulation for a panel board. So that's where our wiring is going to start. We're going to install 2 other device boxes, and that's going to be for 2 receptacles. All right, so first thing that I want to do anytime we're installing boxes is I'm just going to write it down on the top here. Number 1, mark out the boxes. Once you've marked out the boxes, number 2, you're going to mount the boxes. Okay, so for the receptacles, what we're going to be doing is we're going to mount the receptacles so that they're 6 inches above finished floor. Okay, and above finished floor for me is going to be right over here. I'm going to treat this 1 by 1 to be finished floor. So you're not measuring from this surface, you're measuring from effectively this surface. As long as you're consistent on all your receptacles, that's all that matters. We're gonna measure out 8 inches above finished floor, and I'm gonna put some marks on all the studs. Okay, so 8 inches, and this represents the midpoint of the receptacle box. Not every box is designed the same, but the one consistent thing is the midpoint, you might say. Now what I've done here is I got 8 inches, 8 inches, 8 inches. Okay, and sometimes I even like to write this down just so that I remember what it is without having to put a tape measure on there. Okay, so we're going to take our boxes. Now with the boxes, you want to kind of get the halfway mark of the box. And I've already put the mark on this box here so that you can line it up properly. Okay, some of the boxes sometimes have a divot that shows the halfway point. So with this first one here, we're going to use the 2004 box. Okay, and we're going to line up the halfway mark with the halfway mark that has been applied to the box with my arrowhead. And then I'm going to grab my hammer and I'm just going to tap this in. And you don't want to hit in the middle of the box, you want to hit closer to the outside because that's where it's at the strongest. Okay, now we tap that in so that it is fully connected to the 2x4. If this edge of the box sits further out, what happens is when drywall is finished, you're going to always have a plate that sits off of the drywall. You're going to take 2 screws, and I'm just using wood screws that are about 3/4 of an inch long. You're going to mount 2 screws to secure the box in place. And if you happen to have a wood drill or a drill, that would be the best thing. So 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom. And that's nicely mounted. Now this particular box here, this is a 2004, so it's got a lot of capacity. The idea behind this is sometimes that box is good for switches, where you have a lot of cables going into the box. If you become an electrician and you go to school, you're going to learn all sorts of information about box fill. All right, the second one we're going to mount here is this is going to be my junction box. I'm going to treat this like it's a panel board. And we're just going to put this right to the top here. Okay, and again, we're lining up the edge of the box here, or sorry, the edge of the clamp with the front face of the box. You'll notice on the side, there's a 1/2 inch overlap. We're always doing an overlap to account for drywall that we would finish so that the front face of the box is flush with drywall. So we're going to do the same deal with this one. Hammer it into the stud and then secure it with a couple screws. Now in this case, I got a long screw, a 1-inch screw, and a 3/4 inch screw. The idea with the 1-inch screw is I'm going to secure it right through the box. Oops, sometimes that happens. Okay, right through the box. Pop the screw through. And then I'm going to do one on the actual bracket. Into the stud. So every box I like to have a minimum of 2 screws. You don't really need to go more than 2. And in the olden days, a lot of electricians used nails. Because the big reason for using nails was because, honestly, it's because they didn't have drills. And then when drills came along, it became a lot faster to use screws. I'm not using a drill on this demonstration because I don't know if you guys have drills or not, so I just figured I'd just use a screwdriver. Okay, so the last box we're going to put right over here. Now the one I'm using is, I'm using a 2104, and this is a vapor barrier. And what I'm trying to do is I'm demonstrating the different types of boxes and how they'd be mounted. Obviously, if I'm using a vapor barrier with a 2104 box, this would be for an outside wall. Okay, this would never fly for an outside wall, nor would that, because there is no vapor barrier. So what you want to do is you have the vapor barrier sealed up against the stud, and then you're going to look for the midway point on this box, and sometimes it's a little bit handy to mark that midway point. You got a hole right here, and you can kind of eyeball mark it so that it's exactly, that line that I'm putting on is exactly halfway between here and here. Okay, and that line would be applied to my mark right over there. So I see the mark through the vapor barrier. I got this lined up nicely. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit it with a hammer. And that secures the box to the stud. There's a couple pieces of metal that drive right through the plastic and into the stud. Then I'll take my screws and I'm going to secure this to the stud. One on the top, one on the bottom of the box. And again, the front face of the box projects a 1/2 inch beyond the stud, and for the exact same reason of these two, so that when finished drywall is on, the front face is flush with finished drywall. So now what we're going to do is we're going to install a cable from this box into this box, and then from this box into that box. Okay, so this is going to have, and the reason why I put the larger box here is because we're going to have one cable coming in, one cable going out into this one. So it makes sense to have the larger box with the greater amount of cables. So this is the cable I'm using. I've already peeled it off of the roll. Okay, and in prep, so the cable I'm using, I've already peeled it off the roll. And so to prep the box is what I like to do is grab your flat blade screwdriver, and you're going to pop it into the side of the box where the clamp is, and there's a little metal tab, and the flat blade works the best for this. And then you're going to take it, fold it out, and you're just going to rotate it back and forth until it comes off, and that's what it looks like. A little, it almost looks like a tiny little washer. And what I like to do is I'll hold on to those because it acts as a great washer if you ever happen to be mounting panel boards. Okay, and then you would do it to this box as well, and I've already done it to that one. And then this box, we have to make the decision if we're coming in the bottom or down from the top. Because I have more room on the top, I'll come in from the top. So I'm just going to fold this up, rotate it, and that comes out as well. The screwdriver is a little bit magnetized. All right, so we've mounted boxes. I guess the next thing to do after you've mounted the boxes is number 3, install wire. An MD90 wire or cable. Okay, so we're going to go from this guy all the way through. Think of this as your panel board, and what I like to have is at least 8 inches of cable sticking out of the box for termination purposes. And then you're going to tighten your clamp, and don't over tighten the clamp. It should just be snug so that the cable doesn't come out. Okay, and then I'm going to put this wire into this box, but I'm going to just trim it first before I put it in. Okay, and I'm just going to put this wire up against the stud because I'm going to have to staple that at some point. Okay, so I like to arrange the wires nice and pretty like. Okay, so that's done. Now that you're back, we're going to carry on installing cable. So I'm going to come out of the bottom side of that box. I'm going to install my cable here out of the bottom side. And again, you kind of want about 8 inches sticking out of the box for purposes of termination as a minimum. Give yourself the wire to work with. Clamp it, and then you're going to run the wire through the hole that you drilled, and then we're going to go up the stud and then in. So I need roughly about there, that point. So you kind of have to eyeball how much cable you're going to be needing. And that's something that you'll get used to in the trade. There's a lot of eyeballing. You run your wire through the stud. Okay, so it's going to line up the wire nicely because what we're going to do is staple this at the end. And then I'm going to take this cable and bring it up in behind the box and then down. And you'll notice that we have not punctured through the vapor barrier yet. But what I like to do is, if you can see through there, I just like to force the cable. Sometimes it goes and sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't go, take a screwdriver and pop a hole through the vapor barrier so that the cable goes through. You don't want to make a huge hole because the idea of the vapor barrier is it's there to stop airflow from moving in the box. So just a small hole.
Go.
Okay, so once you got the cable in this box, tighten again the clamp so that the cable is secured. And we have now installed all of the wire. Step 4, staple. So you're going to take your staples, your S1s. If it's a single cable, you'll lay your S1 beside the, overlap the cable. And then the idea behind staples, the reason we staple stuff is, and you don't have to hit the staple in so hard that it damages the wire, but what we're looking is just securing the wire so there is no movement. If the wire moves, there's the probability that drywallers or other trades could damage our wire. So we want it to be confined in place. So you don't need to use a whole lot of staples. Okay, in the Canadian Electrical Code, they give you guidelines for stapling, and the guideline is effectively from 300 millimeters from the box you have to have your first staple. Every 1.5 meter thereafter has to be supported. And I use the term staple, but you don't necessarily have to use a staple. You could also use a tie wrap. And then I'm going to put the last staple in. All right, so get the rest of your wire installed, staple your cables so that they're secured, and then when you're done, we'll resume the project. Okay, so the next part is we're going to prep the wire for termination. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our knife, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to fold the cable down, hold the knife, slice in the middle of the cable jacket, through the cable jacket, and then fold the jacket up, push the wires in the opposite direction of the cable, nick the cable, and the cable jacket pops right out. You want to remove the jacket as close as you can to the clamp if possible. Okay, and you're going to do that with every single box. When I'm doing electrical jobs, I like to do common themed tasks all at the same time because that increases my efficiency. So I would be doing this with every single box. I would mount all my boxes, and then after the boxes are all done, I pull all the wire. Then after that's done, I prep all the cable. When that's done, then I would terminate all the receptacles. If you do common tasks, you move a lot faster when you're installing the cabling for a house. Okay, and you want to be real careful that you don't damage a wire when you're doing this. And sometimes what some electricians do is what they'll do a thing called a service loop, and they'll have a loop, okay, that's inside the wall. So it's not just wire to box, it's wire loop to box. So if you damage some of the wire, you can pull some of that loop through, so you have a little extra wire in the event of damage. It's a big thing that a lot of electricians do in Alberta. In BC, we don't tend to do the loop, but it's just a trend I've seen. Okay, so the wire is all prepped, and that would be the next thing. So we've stapled and we've prepped wires. Okay, so now I'm gonna get you to pause the video and you can go prep your wires. All right, so the next thing we're going to be doing is installing a couple different receptacles. So I've got both the receptacles are 515Rs. I'm using two different styles. So I'll use the Decora and then I'll use the standard style receptacle in both these boxes for no really good reason other than that's what I got here. Just a quick overview. This is going to be a receptacle. This is also going to be a receptacle. This box here, we're thinking of this box as like our panel board. Okay, so this is the feed side. And I'm going to add more to this in a bit. Okay, but right now we're just going to leave this alone and we're not going to do anything with this box. Again, think of it as the panel board. Okay, so we'll start off with this one. Okay, so first thing you're going to need to do with some of the 14-2 cable that you have is you're going to need to get a black, a white, and a bond or a bare copper wire. You're going to need to have about 8 to 10 inches of cable handy because we're going to be utilizing that as what we call pigtail wiring that's going to go to the receptacle. Okay, so we're going to start off with the bonding wires. So what I like to do is I like to take the bonding wires and isolate them. So we'll do everything bond first. So we'll start off with this bottom bond wire. With this particular box, you're going to notice that there's a screw right over here. That is your bonding screw. You have a bonding screw there, as well as a bonding screw over here. Right there. Now, when you take a look at your receptacle, they're going to sit in the box in this orientation. If you look at the bonding screw is on the bottom. So it kind of makes sense that one of these two wires, okay, they're both going to have to go to the box, either this screw or both, and then one of these two wires will carry on to that screw. And I'll show you what I'm talking about with that. So I'm going to take this wire here, and I'm going to just loosen this screw off a little bit. I'm going to take that wire and I'm going to rotate it around that screw. I'm going to tighten this. I like to rotate the wire in the direction of the twist of the screw so that when you twist the screw, it retains the wire. It doesn't push the wire off of the post. Now we're not going to cut that because this wire is going to go over to that terminal on the receptacle. Now with this one, I like to tuck it right out of the way, curl it around the screw. It's hard to see. Tighten it. And then we're going to grab our side cutters and we're going to cut all of the rest of that wire out. So effectively, the box has what we call continuity to both copper wires. So both copper wires are touching a screw or connected to a screw, and then we've left one wire long enough to terminate to the receptacle. All right, so we've done that part. Now we're just going to put that off to the side. The next thing we're going to do is the whites. So I like to have the whites, and I stretch them out. I'm going to take my wire strippers and I'm going to trim it so that we have roughly 4 inches of white sticking beyond the front face of the box. We're going to remove 3/4 of an inch of insulation. And I'm going to take my spare white wire here. This is the pigtail. And I'm going to remove equivalent insulation. And this is where that splicing practice comes in handy. We're going to line up the insulation of the wires. And I'm going to splice the 3 whites together. Now we only have to do this with this particular box because that box only has 1 cable going to it. So this cable will go directly to the receptacle. This cable has a little bit of extra prep. So you trim the cable evenly so that all of the wires have been cut, and then we're going to take our wire cap and put it on and make a nice tight seal. Okay, and you want to pull the wire cap to make sure that it is fully on. Okay, and this, what I'm holding is the pigtail. Now we're going to do the exact same thing that we did to the white to the black. By the way, the white is called the identified. Some people call it the neutral. Okay, it's kind of the same thing. 3/4 of an inch of insulation is removed. Grab your pigtail wire. I hope the tools that you guys received are good quality. Greenlee, I believe, is a good brand, so hopefully they're working out for you. Every electrician has their own favorites. For me personally, I like GB brand wire strippers. I find that they're really good wire strippers. I love Klein for just about everything. I use Klein Linesman. GB brand, you can buy these at Canadian Tire at Home Depot. Alright, so this is also prepped, good to go. So here's the pigtail for the black, the pigtail for the white, and then I got my bare copper for the bond. So now I'm going to have you pause the video, okay, because that was a lot of stuff, and I'm going to have you prep the first box just like I did. Now that you're back, okay, we're going to carry on with the remainder of the prep. And what I'm going to do is just trim these cables so that I have about 4 inches of pigtail. And then I'm going to strip off a 1/2 inch on both wires. And then I'm going to curl a wire. So I just wanted to point to the hole. Right over here, a lot of wire strippers will have a hole right there. And if you don't have a hole, you can always use your needle nose as well. Now with this hole, the idea behind this hole is you take the wire, you're holding the wire strippers so that they're flat. You're going to take the wire through the bottom of the hole and you're going to put a curl on the wire. And you're going to do that with all the wires, all 3 wires. Put a curl, and that curl is going to get connected to the receptacle. So now we're going to take the receptacle, and everything I do is always bond first. So I'm going to put the bond wire on. Now you'll notice it curls to the right around the terminal. The idea behind that is when I do a right hand twist on the screw, it keeps the wire retained to the receptacle. This the tool I'm using for this is a #1 Robertson. Okay, I'm just going to put a tiny bit more curl on this because I found that it's... So I'm going to use my linesman just to close it up just a touch. Okay, so I'm going to put this back on. Sometimes the wire, there's a little ridge there that it can sit on and that keeps the wire retained. So you're going to use your #1 Robertson and tighten this. Now with a lot of receptacles, you're going to notice holes in the back side of the receptacle. Don't use those, okay? Good electricians, we connect directly to the terminal. The reason we don't use these holes here is quite often the wire breaks in that hole, or the wire becomes very loose with the actual metal termination, okay, and you get arcing. So a lot of troubleshooting calls come from when people use those holes in the back of the receptacle. Okay, now we're going to take one of the 2 silver screws, tighten it, okay, because we're only going to be terminating 1 screw only on all receptacles, and that's very standard. You don't ever terminate to both screws. Only in Alberta do they do that. And that's not meant to be a slight on Albertans, that's just a practice that they do. All right, so now the white, the trend is the white always goes to silver. Okay, you're going to take the wire, pop it around, and you'll notice that the insulation sits on the little plastic ridge of the receptacle, and you tighten it. While I'm doing this, I just wanted to tell you something, that these receptacles are only rated for copper wires. Okay, do not put aluminum wires on these receptacles. You'll actually see on the back side of the receptacle, it's kind of hard to see, but right over there, and when you grab them, you'll see a circle with copper in them. If you put aluminum to these receptacles, the connection will loosen off, and it doesn't take very long. It only takes about a month or so, and then you're going to see extreme arcing at the receptacle, and that's where it could burn, cause a fire. So I take the black, go around. So I've done the black to the brass, the white to the silver, and the bare to the green. Okay, so bare to green, white to silver, and black to brass. And that is us terminating the first receptacle. So that's the next stage, terminating receptacles. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. Okay, I'm going to let you get your receptacle all prepped and terminated, just like I'm right there. Okay, welcome back. The very last thing I'm going to do, and this is something I learned doing commercial electrical. Anytime you're using metal boxes, I just personally like to put a wrap of tape around the receptacle. Okay, electrical tape. A lot of people say, why do electricians use electrical tape? Okay, this is one of the reasons. You just put a wrap around the receptacle, okay, and just kind of over top or underneath, I guess it would be, that screw. And this is a 632 screw. Okay, it's 6 is the size, 32 threads per inch. That's what that stands for. Typical receptacle screw for mounting the receptacle to the box. Okay, all the way around one layer. And what this does, the whole reason for this is if by chance this side touches that box, you're not going to trip the breaker. If by chance you have to grab the receptacle, you have a piece of insulation so you don't get injured. A lot of people don't do that. I like to do it. It's just something I learned in the early part of my career. Okay, so this one is pretty much done. Now you don't just shove the wires in the box. What you're going to do is fold the wires in. Now if this box happened to be an outside wall box, what I always do is I always try to have my morettes orientated up. So if there was water penetration coming in, it would pool over top of the morettes and not fill into the morettes. And I say morettes a lot. A lot of electricians are going to call them morettes. In fact, what they are is wire caps. The reason we call them morettes is because traditionally that was the only brand of wire cap that there was out there. So that's why it's been dubbed a moret, even though it's wire cap. Okay, and you can secure the receptacle in place. Now I'm going to put these on here, but typically the receptacles would only be installed after the drywall is installed. The house has been painted, sanded, and painted, and at that point, that's when we'd come into it, put on the receptacles. Okay, so you can get the screws started, and then you're going to tighten down the receptacles, 632s, and I'm using a #1 Robertson. So I've used nothing but a #1 Robertson for terminating the wires as well as securing the receptacle. They are also compatible to a Phillips because for the most part, a lot of these receptacles are designed in the States. In the US, Robertson isn't a thing. They use Phillips drivers. Canadians are the ones actually who invented Robertson. Okay, and of course, we're not going to walk away from this until it's level. All right, all receptacles need to be level. I know they're going to be at the same height because that's how the boxes were installed. They were marked at the same height. Okay, so that receptacle is almost done. Before I put the cover plates on, I'm just going to terminate this receptacle here. So I'll give you a chance to put the receptacle into the box, and then when you come on back, and we'll finish the last receptacle. All right, so welcome back. What we're going to do now is terminate the last branch circuit cable to the last receptacle. So first thing I'm going to do, I always do bonds first, is I'm going to take these other two wires out, and I'm going to take my bond wire and I'm going to push it right to the back. You'll see the bonding screw. Just put it off to the side. In this case, you don't have to curl it because there is a ridge. So what I like to do, it's bonded. We're going to trim the wires so they're all the same length. Take off about a ½ inch of insulation off each wire. Curl your wires. Same as the last receptacle. No pigtails required in here because there is only one cable coming into this box. So you're just going to connect directly to the receptacle. You're going to take, I've already tightened two of the screws that we're not going to be using. So we're going to take our bond, terminate our bond first. This is a slightly different receptacle. This is what we call residential grade. The last one was commercial grade. And sometimes residential grade receptacles don't have ridges for the bonds. So depends on the manufacturer. Seems like all receptacles are going to be a little bit different. So we're white to silver, black to the brass, green to the bond wire. Tighten all the terminals. And again, we put the loop on so that the twist is to the right. When I twist a clockwise twist, it keeps the wire on. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit of tape on this receptacle around the terminals for the same reason that I stated previously, just to give it a little bit of protection from the metal box, or if I was to grab it, it wouldn't get hurt. And then we're going to fold the wires in. And I'm using a Phillips now because I just wanted to prove to you that these screws could be either Phillips or #1. Doesn't really matter. when you're tightening the receptacle to the box, there's always a little bit of play. So if for whatever reason you mounted the box to the stud and the stud wasn't perfectly level, okay, thus the receptacle wasn't level, you could always manipulate it within the box a little bit. Okay, remember at the end of the day, when you walk away from a job, if you do become an electrician, make sure that it is level. People don't like receptacles that are not level. And good electrician puts the screw vertical. And it's not quite level, so we can manipulate this a little bit. There. Okay. And then one thing I wanted to point out, I had already trimmed this screw down, but this screw is way too long. Okay, so the nice thing with these wire strippers here, depending on the brand you get, it says 632 on the wire stripper. What you do is you put the screw into the wire stripper and it chops part of the length down and rethreads it when you're taking the screw out. So you just chop, this part comes out, you release, take the screw out, it rethreads the screw as you take it out of the tool. And then you don't have as long of a screw. Different types of cover plates out there. There's the plastic ones, and then you got the non-breakable style. I prefer to spend a few extra cents and buy the non-breakable style. If you buy the plastic ones, quite often if you over tighten the screw, what happens is it cracks the cover plate if it's plastic. If it's non-breakable, there's no problem. And there's our two receptacles mounted.